Hello everybody, my name is Mike Geig, and welcome to another live session on Unity. How's everyone doing today? Hopefully everyone's doing pretty excellent on this Monday. Well, I guess it's Monday afternoon where I'm at, but it might be different for everyone else. So today, our topic is particles, and we are going to look at how to do all sorts of stuff with the new Shuriken particle system. I'm sure you're going to hear me pronounce that like 4 or 5 different ways. I always say Shuriken, even though it's pronounced Shuriken, though I'm sure maybe neither of those are right, and there's maybe another way of saying it. I don't know, but so don't get confused. If you hear something that kind of sounds like that, that's what I'm talking about. Real quick, I saw some people in the chat. Hello, everybody. Everyone's saying hi. Worried that it wasn't starting. I always start these videos about 5 minutes late to give everyone a chance to get in and load it up. So when it rolls around to being just a couple minutes after, don't freak out. We generally go a couple minutes late. All right. So before we begin, I have to do the obligatory plug to our Twitter accounts. So if you have any questions, comments, anything like that, please feel free to follow us on Twitter and chat with us on Twitter at Unity3D, at Mike Geig, which is me, at Will Goldstone, and at The Ant Ranch. We also have chat up and running both on Twitch and the Unity 3D website. So you feel free to log in and chat with us and say hi and ask any questions you might have. And finally, I get this question asked a lot. We will be, I do record these and post them to our website later. So if you have to leave or if you didn't make the session, obviously if you didn't make the session you won't be hearing this, but if you had to leave or whatever got in late, the whole session will be posted and you will be able to see that. So anyway, those are some of the questions that I get a lot. Yes, they're recorded and all that stuff. Feel free to check us out on Facebook, LinkedIn, Google+, all that sort of thing. Okay. All right, so that is my plug. Okay, so today we are talking about particle systems, and a lot of people think that the particle systems are these basic little kind of cheesy little shimmery glittery effects, and it's true, we can certainly do a lot of that stuff. But we can really achieve so much more with the particle system. So I kind of want to go in depth with the particle system today and kind of show you just all of these things that you may not have known about. And then I'm going to show you some examples of some really cool effects that are actually pretty simple to make. Sorry, if you hear me pause, I'm either taking a sip of water or I'm reading chat. It's just me doing these live sessions right now, and so I have to monitor the chat for questions. And so if you hear me pause, that's what I'm doing. Now, I do want to say before I begin that I am by no means an expert on the Shuriken particle system. This is a really complex particle system, so there might be some questions you have that I can't answer, but we'll do our best. All right, it's fairly easy to use, but it's probably pretty difficult to master. It's a really complex system, so we'll look at a lot of the different modules and stuff like that, and kind of go from there. Now, if you have no experience with game development, you might not be sure what a particle system is. And so a particle system is essentially an object or a point, some game object or some geographical shape, or geometrical shape, not geographical, geometrical shape that emits these things called particles. And particles are often small circles, but they can be all sorts of different things, okay? And we're going to look at different ways to do this. Now, since during my last session, my infographic, my illustration went over so well, I created a new one to kind of illustrate the idea behind particles. So what we have here is the premise of a particle system. And basically, with a particle system, we have some central point that is itself the system. All right, and that particle system basically emits these things called particles. Right? And these particles can be billboards, they can be meshes, they can be 3D, they can be 2D. There's a lot we can do with them, and it emits them in some direction. Now, either it sends them forth, like pushes them up, or throws them out in the case of a sphere particle emitter, or it can keep them right where they are, and we can create flashing effects and stuff like that. And obviously particle effects are very high tech, and the gamers really love fancy particle effects. So I feel that I just had to create this graphic here so everyone kind of got the idea of what I was talking about when I said particle effects. So anyway, you know, it's paint. Some people are like Photoshop. No, it's just paint, and it's my mouse, and yeah. Anyway, I probably have way more fun drawing those than you have looking at them. So yeah, maybe I'll post that picture on Twitter later. Okay. All right. So that's all well and good. Some questions. Particles don't have to be small. No, particles can be huge. We can do all sorts of stuff with particles. Particles can be explosions, can be fire, can be smiley faces, can be rain, can be snow, can be ash, can be, you know, really whatever we want. So we can do a lot of really cool stuff with this. Basically, I mean, forget everything you think you know about particle systems. The premise is there's one system that emits particles. That's it. And what those particles are, what the system is shaped like, how fast, how they move, their sizes, their color, all that stuff, is completely up to us. So anything that we can think of a temporary graphical effect, we can build. Okay, so it's actually pretty slick. Now, there's a 2 points of terminology to cover real quick. One is the idea of a particle system, and the other is the idea of a particle effect. Now, a particle system is something we're going to build here in Unity, and a particle system is just one system that emits particles. When we combine multiple particle systems together to create some complex visual, we have what's called a particle effect. So if I wanted to make a torch, right? I could have some particles be the fire and some black particles be the smoke, and together they create a particle effect. Okay, and so just keep that in mind. I may talk a little bit about particle systems or particle effects, and that's basically what I'm talking about. Now, what's really neat is just like everything else in Unity, the particle system is just a component. So I can put a particle system on anything I want. So let's say I want to create a particle system here. I could go to Game Object, Create Other, Particle System, and I get a particle system. Okay, and that's all well and good. This is our default basic particle system. Now, I could do that, or if I wanted to get rid of this, and if I wanted to go Game Object, Create Other, Sphere, and so I have a sphere, I could also turn this into a particle system by simply clicking on it and going to Component, Effects, Particle System. All right, and now the sphere is emitting particles, right? So we can turn anything we want into a particle system. It's not its own game object. We can take any object and add a particle component to it, and that gives us a particle system. All right, so let me get rid of this sphere here. All right, we got a lot of activity in chat. I got to read through this. Okay. Yeah, so like I said, we can create components onto existing objects, or we can create new objects. So let's take a look at how particle systems are represented in our scene view. What I'm going to do is for simplicity, I'm going to take this system and put it at 0, 0, 0. There we go. So one of the things we're going to notice is that in scene view, we can see our particle system animated. If I click on something else, it obviously stops. But when I click on it, we can see that it is animated, right? And as it's animated in scene view, we get these particle effects. And we could see that or particle effect control, I'm sorry. And we can see that using this particle effect control, we can pause our particle effects and start it. We can stop it and start it. We can choose how fast it goes, right? And we can see how long total it's been playing. And so these controls help us a lot when we want to debug or get our effect looking the right way. Say I want to stop it and be like, okay, what does it look like when it first starts? Okay, that's what it looks like when it first starts, and so on and so forth. Or what happens if I pause it and then unpause it, and things like that. So these controls here are very important and they're very useful, and the fact that the particles animate in the scene view is super awesome. It prevents us from having to click play every time we want to make any little tweak to the particle system. And trust me, that would be incredibly cumbersome. So one of the questions is, Mike, you say snow is possible to stack particles like that. Where can you emit from the system and see the snow stack and increase in volume? That's kind of a two-part question, because we can use the particles, and then when the particles collide with something, we can add a snow piece. But we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. We're getting ahead of ourselves with that. So let's just talk about this stuff, and as we get through the different modules, stuff is going to start making a little bit more sense. All right. Another question is about collision with particles. Again, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but yes, we can collide with particles and things like that. All right. So let's talk about creating effects. Now, I said before, effects are when multiple systems are combined to create one effect, right? So let's look at this. If I'm going to create a new particle system, now I have two particle systems. And you will see that either this one is animating or this one is animating, depending on which one is selected, right? So two completely different systems. And let me take this system and let's rotate it. There we go. So we have these two systems, and which one's going is based on which one's clicked. But if I wanted these to be an effect, and effects, remember, are combined systems, I could nest one underneath the other one. And once they're nested, Unity automatically treats them like an effect. Now notice how both of them are animating at the same time. All right, regardless of which one I've clicked, they're both animating, they're both controlled by our particle effect control. All right, so we can basically combine many particle systems together to create our own effects to test them out. All right, let's go ahead and get rid of this. Goodbye and goodbye. Okay, so that being said, I'm going to go ahead and create my base particle system here again and put it at 0, 0, 0 and just do that. Now, one of the questions is it possible to start a particle system not from start? I'm thinking that you mean from script, like using a particle system.play, or I'm thinking you might mean starting the particle system with particles already in existence. Both of those are possible, and we will look at both of those today. So yes, the answer is yes, you can do that, and we will see how. Okay, so that being said, we've talked about the component, we've talked about the game object, we've talked about making our effects. So let's actually start doing stuff with this particle system, okay? So if we look over here in our inspector, we see a whole bunch of these things. These are called modules, okay? And all of these modules dictate how these particles behave and how the particle system behaves, all right? And we can change all sorts of stuff there with that. Before I look at all of these, I want to pay special attention to this button right here. This button is called Open Editor. And what that enables me to do is it enables me to open a new window, which is an editor specifically for the particle system. If I click this, we get this new window. And that's what this window is. Oops. This window is a window all about the particle systems, right? And if I wanted to create a particle effect being comprised of multiple particle systems, I can just hit these plus buttons and add new particle systems, and they will automatically be nested in our hierarchy view. Okay, and we can change all of the modules, and we can see how they look in here and all sorts of stuff. Okay, I don't usually use this window because I generally just work one at a time, and I like seeing them in the scene view. However, if you like this editor window, we could easily just dock it down here, right, and do all our editing or whatever. It's just like any other editor window. We can dock it, we can move it, we can resize it, all that stuff. I don't personally use it, but it's there, and I wanted you to be aware of it in case it's something that you wanted to use. And I'll get rid of those extra ones I added. All right. Now, we have all of these modules, all right, and we can see that only a couple of them are active. So the default module is always active because it's the default module. We also see that we have emission active, and if I uncheck this, deactivate it, you'll see that nothing comes out. It's not emitting anymore. Shape is active, and you can see if I unclick that, we just get a line. And then render is active, and if I unclick that, we can't see anything. So these are the ones that are active by default, and the rest of these are inactive. Now, I can automatically hide a lot of that stuff by clicking this plus sign and unchecking show all modules. Then it only shows me which ones I have enabled, and if I want to see other ones, I click the plus sign and say I want to see size over lifetime, and then size over lifetime appears, right? If I want to see all of them at once, I just click show all modules again. And I'll disable that since showing it enabled it for me. All right, so we can condense and remove some of these modules that we aren't using. More than likely, you'll never use all of them at once, all right? You might use a couple here, a couple there to get the effects that you want, but you're not really going to use every single module every single time. All right, and really the key to working with the Shuriken particle system is understanding these modules and understanding what the modules do, because that's where all the power is in all these modules, right? And we can create some crazy awesome effects. And I'll show you when we're wrapping up here. I'm going to show you a bunch of crazy awesome effects that you wouldn't even think would be possible with this system, but it's not only possible, it's actually rather easy. So the first thing that we have here in the particle system default module is this duration. And the duration is how long the particle system emits particles, before looping, right? And as you mouse over, you can see it says it right there. That's what the duration is. All right, so by reducing the duration, it will cycle more rapidly. Increasing the duration, it will cycle less rapidly. Also, since we are looping, changing this duration doesn't seem to have an effect. It does have an effect. It just doesn't seem to have an effect because we're looping, right? So it's just starting right back over. It's not a big deal. Next is looping. If we turn looping off, it'll only go for the duration and then stop. As we can see here, as soon as this hits 5 seconds, it's going to stop emitting because its duration was 5 seconds. With looping on, it just keeps going. All right. Okay. Next, we have this thing called pre-warm. And pre-warm starts our particle system off as if it was already going. So just to show you, if I hit simulate, you'll see how the particles start, right? When I hit simulate, they start and they start coming up. But if I have pre-warm on, I'm not sure this will work in the scene view or not, but if I hit simulate, yep, it starts with particles already up and around because it was pre-warmed. It pretended those particles were already there for us, all right? So that's what pre-warm does. Pre-warm allows us to start something already having emitted particles. Next, we have the start delay, which is how long in seconds it will wait to emit particles once the scene has been started. All right. Then we have start speed and start lifetime is the lifetime of these particles. Now, the term start lifetime means this is unmodified lifetime. This is unmodified. This isn't modified by any of these other modules. This is our basic particle emitter. What is the lifetime? And the lifetime is how long each particle lives. You can see if I turn the lifetime down to say 99 or 0.99, so 1 second, each individual particle lives 1 second before dying, right? I can make it longer, and by making it longer, we can zoom out and see that they go much higher. All right, so I can choose how long particles will stay alive. By reducing the length of time, it comes in a bit. Default, it's 5, all right? Then we have the start speed, and the start speed is how fast they're going when they come out. And again, we can increase that to make them go much faster, or we can slow it down to make them go much slower. All right, and we have options there. Start size is how big it is, right? So right now it's a size 1, but I can make it much larger, and I can make it much smaller. Let's get in there. Yeah, real tiny, right? So I have the option to change that. Start rotation is how it's rotated. Now, of course, these are circles, so you're not going to see any rotation. Start color is the color these things are. Okay, you can pick any color that you want, and it turns that color. I'm going to show you some cool stuff here in a bit, but I do want to go through each of these because each of these in the default is fairly important. All right. Next, we have gravity multiplier. And the gravity multiplier is how much of the world's gravity is applied to our particles. All right. So right now, 0 is applied to our particles. And it goes between 0 and 1, 1 being 100%. So right now, 0 gravity is applied. But if I wanted gravity, let's say I wanted 100% of gravity, all right, we'd see that they come out and then they just immediately fall. I can make them go a little bit higher by increasing their speed, and you'll see they'll pop out and then arc back down. All right. So we can kind of make it like a popcorn popper, if you will, where they're emitting out the top and then the gravity is taking effect. And I could do less gravity. Say I only wanted 50%, I could do 0.5, so on and so forth. So I can choose how much of the gravity affects it. I'll leave this at 0 right now. Next, I have inherent velocity, and that's set to 0. What inherent velocity is if this game object were to be moving, all right, how much of the velocity of this game object will be given to the particles it emits, right? Think about when you're driving down the road. You're driving in your car and you throw something out the window. Well, that object that you throw out the window is going just as fast as you are, right? So, to your perspective, it's just flying away. But, if you were passing somebody standing still on the street, right, they would see whatever you threw, whizzing past, going really, really fast. So if this particle system were to be moving, we could give the velocity of the particle system to the particles itself. Once again, 1 is 100% of the velocity and 0 is 0% of the velocity. Now, we're not going to see any effect of this because this object is in fact not moving. But if it was, then we would be able to transfer some of that velocity to the particles themselves. Next, we have the simulation space. We can choose if we're simulating between local and world. This isn't going to have any effect right now because the particle system is not parented under anything else, and so it's just going off of world system anyway. But if our particle system was parented under another object and that object was rotated or scaled or whatever, we could use our simulation space to determine if we wanted the local or world systems, right? Coordinate systems. All right. We also have play on wake, which determines when our scene first starts, whether or not the particle system will start. So if I turn that off and I hit play, you're going to see that I don't see any particles because nothing told my particle system to start. Okay. And then finally we have max particles, which is the maximum number of particles this can emit before being not able to emit anymore. Once it emits the maximum particles, it has to wait for some of the ones to die before it'll emit any more. So let's reduce this significantly. Let's say only, say, 5. Only 5 will be emitted. We have to wait for those 5 to die before we get new ones. Okay, so it starts at 1,000, but we can change that to be whatever we want. All right. One second here, I got to read chat. One moment. Okay. So that is our default module. Okay, and that's all very basic stuff. That's kind of, whatever. All of that is pretty simple. Before I move on to the next module, though, I'm going to start showing you something kind of cool. Now, we have our particle system here, and it's emitting some white particles. We have a lot of options, even in the default module, to change how things look. For all of these things that have this drop-down arrow next to them, we can choose some different ways of determining our values. So, for instance, our color. If I hit this drop down, I can see that I can choose a basic color, which is what it is now. I can choose a gradient. I can choose a random color between two colors, and I can choose a random between two gradients. So if I wanted it random between two colors, let's say I wanted between white and red, it would start emitting some random color between white and red every time it emits a particle. Maybe I want a gradient. So I can click here and use my gradients to maybe make this blue. So these will go blue to white over the lifetime of the emitter. So you'll see that when it first cycles, it starts really blue, and by the time it ends cycling, it's going to be real white. All right. So we have some options there. Okay. So we can change kind of how these things look here. Let's come back to just basic color for now. But let's say I want to change my start speed. Okay, I can make my start speed this thing called a curve. Okay, and the curve allows me to specify a curve of values. Let's say at the beginning I want my speed to be really small, like 1. Now, near the end of the cycle, because remember this cycle is every 5 seconds, near the end of the cycle, I want it to be 5. So it starts off slow and then it speeds up. All right, and when it cycles again, it starts off slow and then it speeds up. Starts off slow and then speeds up. I could make it start off slow, and I can move this curve by creating a keyframe. And to create a keyframe, you just double click on the curve. So I can make it start off slow and then go into the negatives and then go fast again. And so what we'll see is happening is it's going to start slow and then go negative and then go fast. Right? So I could do all sorts of wackiness if I really wanted to, just to create a really crazy curve, right? Where it's just shooting off in all sorts of directions and everything like that. And so we can use these curves to kind of, over the lifetime, change how the particle system works. All right, I'm going to go back to constant just because I can leave it at 5 so we can look at some of the other ones. But we'll see sometimes where that curve is useful and other times where the curve is just kind of weird. But we can do all sorts of stuff. We can make the size of our particles get bigger over time. So let's choose a curve here. So we can see that the particle starts at 1. And I can go to the start size here and just kind of pan over to make it bigger. So let's make it start at 1. Start at 1, just like it is now. And over the lifetime, we'll have it escalate up to a higher, I believe I have that at 2 there. So we can see it starts small, and then they gradually get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then when it cycles, right, they get small again. If I don't want that harsh cycling, I could always put a keyframe here, and then bring this back down to 1. Right, so they'll gradually get bigger, then get smaller, and then get bigger, and then get smaller, without any like harsh cycling seams, if you will. So we can adjust all that there. I'm going to go back to constant though, so we can start talking about some of these other modules. All right, we will talk about changing the texture. We'll talk about changing the textures later. Can you make all particle systems under the same root in the scene tree? Absolutely. You certainly can. Nesting them together, though, makes them one particle effect as opposed to a bunch of different particle systems. So just be aware that if you nest them together under one root, then they all kind of become one. Right? So you might want multiple roots or whatever. However you want to structure it, it's entirely up to you. So let's look at the emissions module. This one's turned on by default, and we have a couple things here. So first off, we have this rate. And the rate is how many particles per second are emitted. Right now, 10 particles per second are emitted. I could certainly increase that and make that 139.6 particles for every 1 second are emitted. Or I can make it real small, be like 2 per second are emitted. Whatever we would like to happen, right? I'll leave that at 10. 10's the default for now. We can also choose our rate over time or over distance. If I choose distance, you're going to see that nothing happens. Distance allows me to emit particles as the particle system moves, right? So let's say the particle system is the fire back end of a rocket, right? As the rocket is moving forward, it's throwing particles behind it. So we might choose an emission based on distance, not based on time, right? That's entirely up to us. So we can make it so it leaves behind a trail of sparkly glitter or whatever based on distance, or we can base it on time and then it's just constantly emitting over time. If we choose, one question here is how would I change how fast they are emitted? That is the speed, start speed. That's how fast they are emitted. The rate at which they're emitted is under emission. The speed with which they are emitted is under start speed. Now, I have this option. If I choose time as my method, this new option appears here called bursts. And bursts allows me to do just that, create bursts. So if I want to create a burst, I can just hit this plus right here. And we'll see at 0 seconds, every 0 seconds, we'll get a burst of 30. And if we watch here, we'll see a burst right there. There's our burst, right? And we can increase the amount of our burst, like, let's say 60. We get these large bursts. And the burst is not determined by the rate at all. It's just something that we can do if we're going over time. So I can create a new burst at, say, 2 seconds, and a new burst at, say, 4 seconds. And even if I take my rate all the way down to 0, I'm still going to get these bursts, right, where we just blow out a bunch of particles at once, all right? So we can create bursts to do that, and we can also have emission with our bursts, right? There's no reason we can't do that. Oh, let's make this go bigger. Let's go back to 10. 10's the default. So we can have the bursts and the regular emission, right? So that's our emission module. We obviously have to have the module turned on, because if we turn it off, it's not going to emit anything. All right, let's get rid of all these bursts now. But we can create these bursts and kind of have like explosion-y effects. If you want a bunch of particles to be released all at one time, a burst is what you want to do. A question here is about particles being 2D or 3D. We'll talk about that later, but yes, we can have 3D particles. All right, so yeah, that's our emission module. We need to turn it on, and we can use it to change the rate at with which they're released and any burst that we might want. Next, we have this cone, or the shape, the shape module, which allows us to determine how they're emitted. By default, we have a cone, all right? And we can see the cone here, and it's throwing particles in every direction. And we can change the angle of the cone, right, to make them emit more widely, or we can make it narrow. That's entirely up to us. Ooh, that was a bit much. I don't remember what the default was. Probably something like that. Whatever. 25. We'll go with that. So we have the angle of the cone. We also have the radius, which is how big our base is, right? I believe that started at 1. And so we can use that to dictate the what I want to say, the shape of the emitter. One of the questions, can particles live forever? I don't know. We can make them live a long time, but I don't know if we can make them live forever. I have no idea. I do not believe so. I believe all particles eventually die. If particles live forever, our game would start to slow down really, really, really fast, and that would not be good. Okay, so we have our radius. We also have this length, which is something that we're not able to adjust right here. And we also have emit from, and we can choose where we're emitting from. So we can emit from the base of the cone, right? We can emit from the base of the shell. We can emit from the volume, so anywhere within inside the cone they can start. So they can start at the top or at the bottom, or anywhere along the edge of the volume, the bounding volume, right? By default, it's set to base. We can also choose random direction, which if we're doing volume shell, random direction will make them fly out in a random direction from the border of the volume of this cone. Now, besides the cone, let me set that back to the way it goes. Besides cone, we can emit like it's a sphere, so we emit in all directions. We can also emit a semicircle, a hemisphere. All right. We can emit a box. All right. So we can make the box bigger, and I'll actually show you something really cool with that here in a second. So we can emit box, and then we can emit mesh, and mesh only works if we actually have a mesh, but we can basically make the skin of a 3D object emit particles out by using mesh there. But let me show you something cool with this box, right? So I have a box selected, and let me find my camera. There's my camera. Okay, so I have box selected. So let's increase the X of this, just like that. Increase the X, something like that, and then let's rotate it, and then let's move it up above our scene. And what we get, did I mess with the size? I must have, yeah, I messed with the size. So now what we have is we effectively have snow or rain. You know, we can modify this to be whatever we want. A lot of people think that if you want to have like rain in a scene, you have to have these particle emitters all over your scene, and that to be raining on all the different objects in your scene and stuff like that. And really, that doesn't. I mean, it works, but it's highly inefficient. What we could do instead is create basically a box emitter like this, right, and put it just in front of the camera. And if the player just sees snow falling in front of the camera, they're going to think they're seeing snow all the way out there, especially if we set our start size to a random between 2 constants, and we want the start to be between, say, 0 and 2. So now it looks like some are falling behind, some are falling in front, that sort of thing, when really it's just this box right here emitting a bunch of different sizes. The player will never know. It's just a great way to go on with that. Furthermore, if I were to rotate this just a little bit more, like this, all right, and add a little bit of gravity, now the effect is that snow is kind of driving from wind and then kind of curving and falling to the earth, all right? Now this is so useful, or only so useful with the default particle, but we could create a better looking snow particle, and it will look better. For instance, when I do rain, I create a long stretched small particle, so that when it falls it looks like the rain is streaking across the screen, and that's actually pretty basic there. Alright, so for those of you who are like, how do I make it rain or snow on my scene, you could create a giant, I mean, we could certainly make this really, really big, right? But we don't need to. We just need to put it right in front of the camera, and the player will never know the difference. So yeah, you can do some interesting things like that. So let me reset this now. Let me go back to 0 for the gravity, and let me go back to a constant for my size. Okay, but anyway, so and let's reset this back to 0, 0, 0 with a rotation of 0, 0, 0. Okay, just so we're back to the way. And you know what? Actually, it was rotated this way to begin with. There we go. So that's the box, and we can use box to create some pretty neat effects like that. So let's go back to cone. But anyway, yeah, we can do that with box, and it's actually pretty slick. So just so you're aware, a lot of people always wonder how to do that, and that's how you can do it. There are other ways that we can manage that. Like one of the people mentioned, there's no parallax and stuff like that. We can use multiple emitters to create parallax effect and stuff like that. The sky's the limit, really. But if we're looking for a cheap, easy effect, that's what we can do. And you know, we can do all sorts of crazy, like super physics-based whatever. But if we're looking for simple, that's about as simple as you get. All right, so those are the emission and the shape modules, and we need to really step it up because there's a lot more modules, and I'm really burning through time here. So next is the velocity over lifetime. And velocity over lifetime basically determines how the velocity changes as the particles live. So the particles each live 5 seconds. We know that because we see our start lifetime is 5. So particles will live 5 seconds, right? Particles are unity free. Just one of the questions. Particles are unity free, not unity pro. So these particles live 5 seconds, so we can change their velocity over that time. Let's say I want the velocity over time to be 5 in the x direction, and we get something kind of like that. And what I want to do, I'm going to change my shape to be box. If they're emitting in a line, the effects will be a little bit easier to see. There we go. So we can make the velocity over lifetime, say 5, right, along the x-axis. Or we can use a curve, and you enable and disable the axes from the curve system down below by just clicking on it. So I want the x-axis. I could go between -1 and 1, and we can create a nice curve, like, and let's do 5, -5 and 5, and we get this kind of like curve as the velocity pushes it this way and then pushes it that way over time. All right. So this is our velocity over time, and we can see that we can adjust it, we can curve it, and all those sorts of things. And yeah, so that's effectively what we do with that. So velocity over time. We can limit the velocity over lifetime. So limit velocity over lifetime allows us to specify how fast a particle can go. And if it tries to go any faster, we stop it. All right? So one of the questions is, so does the velocity increase over time, or is this still the driving particles thing? It only increases over time if we use a curve. If we use a static variable, that's just its velocity the whole time. All right, so that's what the curves are for. Limit velocity over lifetime allows us to slow things down. So for instance, right now we see that speed is set to 1. So anytime a particle attempts to go faster than 1, it's dampened down to be 1. We can reduce how much it's dampened, right? But generally, if we want to stop it at 1, we stop it at 1. And we can stop it in different axes too. We can say different speeds for the x, y, and z axis. And we can also use a curve to say we want it to not be able to go faster than 1 at the beginning, but it can go up to maybe 1,000,000 at the end, or whatever, right? So we can use this curve to really to edit that. But that's our velocity over lifetime, our limit velocity over lifetime. Just allows us to specify how slowly we want all of our particles to go at the maximum speed. All right. So that's the limit velocity over lifetime. Let me minimize that. Next, we have the force over lifetime. Now, force over lifetime is different than velocity over lifetime. All right. So see here, I'm turning velocity over lifetime when I have 5 for my x. Right. That's my velocity over lifetime. We can see it's a linear change. Linear change to our velocity. Okay. Now let's look at force over lifetime. If I make this 5, you see the difference? It's parabolic. All right. Force over lifetime continually adds force over the lifetime of this object. So it might start off slow, a slow curve, but then it speeds up exponentially. All right. So it's an exponential change. So one of the questions is, what's always the big difference between velocity over lifetime and force over lifetime? And that's the big difference. Force is cumulative, velocity is static. All right. One moment. Sorry about that. I have a dog, and my dog was not very happy. Okay. So that's the difference between velocity over lifetime and force over lifetime. Force just continually adds force to the particle, where velocity is just a fixed number. All right. Now, here's a fun one, color over lifetime. Color over lifetime allows us to change the color of the particles over life. All right. So if I were to say create a gradient here by clicking on the color, I could say let's make it red and it'll fade to white. And we can see that all the particles are emitted red and they go all the way up until they are white. Okay. Now you might be thinking, how is that different from the start color? So let me show you the difference here. We can also make them fade, by the way, because we have this alpha channel. So I can make them go to, like, say, 0 alpha. So they will slowly fade to nothing, right? So we can certainly do that. But here's the big difference. So with this, with color over lifetime, that's color over the lifetime of each particle. So the particles all start red and they slowly change color. Now, the difference between that and start color, if I were to choose gradient, you'll see that as the particle system itself cycles, so some start blue, some start purple, some start white. That's the difference. These all affect the particle system, and these all affect the particles themselves. All right. So anyway, yeah, that's basically what's going on there. So this affects the particle system. This affects the particle. Right. Let me set that back to white. So yeah, we can see how they all emitted the same color in this, and they all fade the same way using this color over lifetime. Next we have color by speed. Color by speed is a really cool one too. So color by speed basically says the faster an object is going, we can change its color based on that. So we can say, hey, if it's going this fast, be this color. If it's going this fast, be this color. So for instance, if I want to set this to be when an object is I gotta enable it. I was wondering why I couldn't select it. If I want to say when an object is going 10 versus when an object is going 5. All right, and let's change it. So let's say when it's 5, it's going to be white, and when it's 10, it's going to be red. So we can see that it didn't change, right? Because these are all going exactly 5. But let's mix that with our force over lifetime now. And we can see that as the particles go faster, their colors change. All right, so we can make particles change all sorts of different ways, right? So particles can change color based on how fast they're going. Slower particles can be one color, faster particles another, and it'll do a nice smooth transition in between that. All right, so that's our color by speed. We also have size over lifetime. So size over lifetime allows us to make our particles get bigger or get smaller. All right, so we can see here that these particles are all the same size. If we were to change the start size, the particle emitter would emit different size particles. However, what we want to do is we want to change each particle to slowly transition from one size to the next. So if I enable this one, and this one's going to be a curve automatically, I can say that maybe it'll start at 2. It starts at 2, but over its lifetime, it goes down to 0. So the particle starts big and slowly shrinks, just like that. Okay, that enables you to make better fire effects, right? Especially if we slow it down. Right, we can get like little torch effects and stuff like that. Like if I were to do, I don't know, I don't know. That's not really good fire. Yeah. I mean, we could nest a few effects and create some fire-like effects that way. But yeah, we can do all sorts of. If we were to add smoke to it and inner fire and all that sort of thing. Then we can go with that. One of the questions, this is not beta, this is the public version of Unity, what I believe 4.2. As much as I'd love to be using 4.3 right now, there's no way I would show you guys that. So I think I could get in trouble for that. So no, I'm using 4.2. I'm not doing using a beta or anything. So what I have is the same version you can have if you update right now. So yeah, so nothing special there. No insider secrets or anything. Let me change my speed back here now that I modified it. So we can change our size over lifetime just like that. We can also change our size by speed. So we can say maybe if we want this going 10 versus 5, and we want it to get bigger as it's going faster, right? So I can say it's going to start at 1, go to 5. We'll see that they don't change until we turn on our force over lifetime. We can see the faster it goes, the bigger it gets. All right. So yeah, we can do all that stuff too. I cannot say when 4.3 will come out. I'm sorry. So we can change that as well. So the size over the lifetime, I promise everyone's getting kind of antsy in the chat there. We're almost done with these modules. There's a lot of the modules, but I really want to cover them all, just so you can see. And then I'll show you some neat stuff. Okay. So then we got size by speed. Rotation over lifetime allows us to change the rotation, obviously. I'm going to stop showing you every single one of these. We also have rotation by speed, which basically allows us to rotate them based on how fast they're going. External forces is a cool one. So external forces has to do with things like explosives, wind, and anything like that. All right, explosives, wind, sorts of things. We can say how much of that force is applied. If we want our particle system completely immune to explosions or wind, we'd set the multiplier to 0. If we want them to behave normally, we'd set it equal to 1. Maybe if we want it to be 2 times as affected by external forces, we'd set that equal to 0. Okay? Yeah. Basically, if you're not dealing with wind or explosions and stuff like that, you don't really need to use that module. And that's all that does, is it allows your particle, determines how much your particles are affected by that. Next, we have collision. Now, this one's cool. This one, the collision module, is where you're going to run into trouble. This is where, if you overdo it, you're going to have serious efficiency issues. Because collision with particles is really, really fun. However, if you overdo it, things aren't going to go well. So let me turn this off for a second and let me create a sphere. So I'll create a sphere and I will put that sphere at 0, 0, 0 with a scale of 2, 2, 2, and I will move that up to say here. Okay? So, I did not mean to hit play. I will click my particle system and we can see that the particles are just traveling straight through the sphere. They're not colliding with it at all, they're moving right through it. Now, if I turn collision on, first, again, nothing's going to happen. We have 2 collision modes. We have planes and we have world. Planes is the most efficient, all right? Planes is the most efficient where world is much less efficient. One quick question. Does anybody know how to make a one-shot effect like the legacy system? Yes. Basically, you make it not loop, and you set the emission to 0, and you give it a burst, and it will be a one-time effect. That's how you do it. Okay, so that was real quick. So let's go ahead and set this to world real quick. World means that all your particles will collide with all the colliders in the world like you would expect them to. All right, so the particles are hitting the sphere, and if I move the sphere, then the particles will, can't move it that much. Then the particles will hit and bounce just like you would expect. So collision is turned on. And we can have as many objects as we want, and these particles will collide with all of them. Okay? Very simply. All right? That's all well and good. Let me move that over a bit more. But it's very inefficient. Okay, because it's got to calculate collision with each one of these particles against all of the colliders in the world, right? And so that gets really, really hairy. No, they don't collide with each other. One of the questions was, do they collide with each other? They, in fact, do not. So this can get really beat up your efficiency in your code. But let's look at some of the module components. So first is dampen. And dampen is how much does this slow down when it collides. And dampen affects every axis, your x, y, and z axis, equally. They all get dampened when dampen is turned on. All right. Next is bounce. And bounce is how much of the velocity of the particles will be retained when it collides. So I can adjust it this way. The big difference between dampen and bounce is that dampen affects all axes and bounce only affects the axes which the bounce occurred, right? So if it hit and bounced directly back on the x-axis, only the velocity of the x-axis is affected, not the velocity on the y or the z-axis. All right. So let's go back to 1 there, and we can see if we leave it at 0 dampen and 1 bounce, these don't lose any speed when they bounce off. All right. Next, we have lifetime loss. So all of our particles last 5 seconds because our lifetime is 5 seconds. What we can do is we can make it lose lifetime as it collides. So let's say every time it collides with something, it loses half its life. All right. We make that 0.5. Now it's losing half its life when it collides with something. Any particles that don't collide live on full length, but the particles that do collide lose half their life. All right. Minimum kill speed. Minimum kill speed is how slow an object has to be going, or particle has to be going, that when it hits, it doesn't bounce at all. So if I made the minimum kill speed something like, I don't know, say 5, they wouldn't bounce because they're all going exactly 5, and so they're going to be killed. Finally, we have collides with, which is our culling mask. We can choose what this collides with and what it doesn't. Oops. So we can choose where the collision occurs. We can also choose the collision quality. If you're having a hard time with the efficiency of your system, you can turn this down. Make it not as good quality of collision, but if you want better collision, you set that to high. Finally, send collision messages will tell the object it's being collided with. So with this turned on, this sphere is getting like 9 collision messages every second, probably more than that, letting it know, hey, you're being hit, hey, you're being hit, hey, you're being hit, right? And let the code of the sphere handle that if it wants. Yeah, so we can pass those messages if we want, or we can turn them off, right? Very simply, just like that. All right, so now, I mean, like I said, that's very inefficient because it's super accurate world collision with all the colliders and stuff like that. But let's say my particles were just hitting an arched ceiling, all right? So they're hitting this arched ceiling, and that's it. They're never gonna. The arched ceiling will never move, and the particle system will never move, right? Let's say it's a torch or something, right? It doesn't really matter. But it's emitting particles. It's a static emitter. It's not gonna move against the ceiling. That's not gonna move. So we don't really need to do all these complex calculations for a system like that. Actually, I'm just gonna get rid of that sphere. Instead, we can use a different collision system. So instead of world, we can use planes. And planes allows us to specify planes that these particles will bounce off of. All right. So let's say I had some planes already existing in my world. I could just click and drag the planes onto this section, or I could click this circle and pick some planes. I don't have any right yet, but if I had some, I could add them. Since I don't have any, I can click this plus sign and it'll create a new plane for me, just like that. So there, now I have a plane. And my particles are bouncing off of this plane. And the best thing about it is the plane is not visible. Okay, it's an invisible plane. It's not drawing. There's no renderer there, which means I can have this anything. It could be a stone arch. It could be I don't know. It could be a banana. It doesn't really matter. And all our particles are going to bounce off of it. All right, and I can click the plane and I can rotate it, say like that, and then my particles are going to bounce off of it like that. So if I align this plane with something static that's in my scene, the particles are automatically bouncing off of that, and then all of a sudden I don't have to do all these complex calculations. Those are just being done easily for me. Furthermore, I can add another plane by hitting this plus sign, all right, and hit the plus there to create a new plane. And this one, oops, plane 2, let's move it over and let's rotate it down. And now we can see that we have this kind of balancing effect between the two, all right? And so we can do some things with that, like we can make it bounce more. So by bouncing, it speeds up, right? Or whatever. We can modify this to be whatever we want. The key component is that. Let me grab my camera here. The key component. Oops, not the one I wanted. Where are you at? That's the one I want. The key component is that the planes themselves are not visible, all right? So we can have anything we want in our scene there. We won't be able to see these planes, and it all works out very nice. And it's actually very efficient, so we don't have to worry about all these crazy calculations between the two. So one of the questions, can the particles bounce between the two planes? Absolutely. If we make the planes face each other, then absolutely they will bounce against each other, right? If I were to... I think maybe like that. Yeah, there we go. And so we get this nice boom, 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 whatever. And then the particles start dying and stuff like that. So absolutely, we could certainly do that. We have a lot of options there. But that's the planes collision mode, and it's much more efficient than world collision because it's very static in nature. And then let me just get rid of those, and I no longer need these planes transformed, so I can just get rid of them. All right, so that's kind of our collision. Again, I can't stress enough. World collision, inefficient but hyper accurate, and planes super efficient, but it has to do with these planes and it's very static. Okay. So yeah. So one of the questions, world collision is basically what you would use for complex objects. Absolutely. Yep. That's absolutely what you'd want. You'd want to use world. Though really, it really depends on the effect you're trying to get. But yeah, if you absolutely had to have accurate collision, that would be the way to go. All right. Okay. One question, is it possible that particles find their way and continue up its way like smoke coming out of a house? Absolutely. For that, I would just align some planes. I'd use planes and align them with the ceiling of the house, and then they would hit and roll and whatever. I would just make it not bounce. Yeah, that sort of thing. Okay, so that's our collision module. Next, we have sub-emitters, and sub-emitters is super fun. So let me show you this here. I'm going to enable sub-emitters, and what sub-emitters are is basically what they sound. They allow our particles themselves to emit particles, all right, which is really, really fun. Okay, so what I can do is, let's say I'm going to create a firework effect. So let me go to my shape here. Let me turn this back into a cone. Let's increase the angle of the cone, something like, say, that. And let's create a sub-emitter at the death of my particles. We can have two sub-emitters for the birth of particles, the collision of particles, and the death of particles. All right? So for death, I'm going to go ahead and hit the plus sign to create a new emitter, and then all of a sudden, my emitters are creating emitters. And I'll go to the sub-emitter, and I will make it red, so we'll see. And every time a particle dies, it explodes. All right? So yeah, so we can do all sorts of neat things. Now, real quick, something that's kind of tangential. Someone mentioned things we can do through scripting. The one thing about the Shuriken system is we don't have a lot of control of it through scripts. So unlike most of the parts of Unity where we have an incredible amount of control through scripting, with the Shuriken system we can start it, we can stop it, we can modify the components of it, but that's kind of all we can do with it. So we don't have a ton of scripting control with the Shuriken system. So I just wanted to say that real quick because I saw someone mention scripting. Yeah. And so yeah, we can have these emitters create emitters, right? Something like that. We could do, let's do this. Let's for our sub emitter, let's go to emission. Oh, it is already set that way. So rate is 0, and then we have a burst. So that certainly works. So yeah, so they're each exploding like that. We could also add one. You know what? Here, you want to go crazy with this. Let's make the sub-emitter of our emitter have a sub-emitter. We can go deeper. So I'll hit this. We'll hit plus right here. And so now my system is slowing down a lot. So basically, I have no idea what that's going to do for you guys watching along. But for me, that looks really awesome. So we have emitters emitting sub-emitters emitting sub-emitters. And so all of a sudden things have gotten pretty crazy. Which is actually going to be useful because right next I'm going to talk about how we determine what order we're drawing our particles in. But let me undo this here because that is insanity. So I'm going to get rid of my sub-emitters here by choosing none in the sub-emitter section, and then I'll just delete those. But yeah, so anyway, we can do all sorts of stuff. Don't you worry. Can you make it spawn other particle systems on collision? Absolutely. So if I come down here, you can see on collision, I can create a particle system. So it can create particles when it collides with things. So like they're smashing apart or whatever, right? So if I wanted, I can make it so every particle dies whenever it collides, and then it emits a sub-emitter that bursts, right? So it's like every particle blows apart, right? And we can do actually a lot of really neat stuff that way. So anyway, yeah, so we have some effects. Sub-emitters are a lot of fun to play around with. I'm not going to lie, I have a lot of fun with that. So let's turn that off. Next, we have texture sheet animation. Now, I don't have a good example for you, but I can explain what this does. So basically, texture sheet animation allows us to not specify a texture as a particle, like we have these little circles here, but to specify an entire texture sheet, a bunch of different particles, and over the lifetime, rotate through them. So we can say, hey, start at frame 1, then go to frame 2, then go to frame 3. So what it will look like is each of these particles themselves are animated because they'll flip through the texture sheet, right? So if you've already done any 2D game programming, think of sprite sheets, and that's what I'm talking about, right? How we animate through these sheets, and it gives us this illusion that these things are animated, okay? So I don't have a texture sheet to show you. I meant to grab one and I just didn't, so I apologize. But it's real simple. You know, you just enable this one. You tell it how many tiles are in the sheet. You specify, do you want to animate over a single row or the whole sheet, how many frames, the number of cycles, and that sort of thing. Just like any sprite-based animation sheet animation, right? So I don't really need to go into that. And the last thing I want to look at is the renderer. With the renderer is the other default one that's turned on. If you turn it off, you don't see anything because it's not rendered. And this determines how things are drawn, all right? How they're rendered to the screen, all right? So the first things first is render mode. And we have these in Billboard. And Billboard, if you recall from any of our previous sessions, Billboard is a 2D flat image that always looks at the camera. So no matter how I'm moving, they always look at the camera. So they look 3D, but they're not. They're flat and they just follow the camera, and it's real simple like that. I could also choose stretched billboard, which allow them to skew with their speed. Think of like stars flying by as you're in a spaceship or whatever. Or we can do horizontal billboards, so they're billboarded flat. So I'd have to come down and look up at them to see them. Okay, so we can do horizontal billboards. We can do vertical billboards, which pretty much looks like normal. Except that if we were to look up at them, they would be flat. And then we have mesh. And mesh allows us to, just like it sounds, specify a mesh, and these are drawn on the mesh. So mesh allows me to actually emit 3D particles that have been texture mapped, and then they're textured, right? So this is a cube mesh with this circular texture on it. It doesn't look great because they're not made for that. That's not what their point is. Please don't post links in chat for all the people that are doing it. I would just prefer if you did not. I don't know what they're linking to. I don't want us associated with any inappropriate materials. So just please don't link. I appreciate that. Okay, so anyway, we're going to go back to Billboard because that's our basic, and that's easy there. And now let's talk about, we can determine the normal direction, all right, which is how much these billboards look at the camera. When it's 1, which is 100%, the billboards look directly at the camera always, right? But we can change this so the billboards don't necessarily look directly at the camera. And actually, we're not seeing the difference because we're not the camera. That's the camera we're talking about. And that will adjust whether or not the billboards look directly at the camera. We'll just leave that at 1. Next is our particle. I'll show you here in a second how to change that, but that's where we define what we want our particles to look like. All right. And then we have our sort mode. Sorting determines which particles are drawn. Do we want them drawn by distance, youngest first or oldest first, or no sorting? So basically, if we have a ton of particles and we want the closest ones to be drawn first, we'd choose by distance. Or if we want the ones that were the newest, we'd choose youngest, that sort of thing. That really only applies if we have a ton of particles. Next, we have sorting fudge. And sorting fudge determines which particle system, or what order the particle systems are drawn in. So with sorting fudge, the lower numbers are the more important ones, and thus will be drawn on top of other ones. All right. So that's what, I don't know why they chose the word fudge, but that's sorting fudge. That's what it is. Then we have cast shadows, whether or not these particles will actually cast a shadow from a light. Receive shadows will be whether or not shadows are cast upon our particles. And then our max particle size determines how big the particles can get, the maximum size, right? Okay. Next we have resimulate. Resimulate just determines when we make changes and resimulate is not on, those changes won't immediately be apparent. With resimulate checked, any changes we make will immediately be apparent. And finally we have wireframe. We could turn wireframe on if we wanted to see the whole effect. All right? And we could see the wireframe of all the different particles. So we can turn that on and off. Okay, so that is all of the modules, and there are a ton of them. Okay, so it took me pretty much our whole time just to talk about the modules. So let's take a few minutes now and let's look at some cool stuff. All right, so let me go to my cone shape here and set that back to 25. Let's look at creating our own particle texture. All right, because we have these simple white ones and that's all well and good, but let's look at something else. So what I have created is I've created this heart PNG. I'll just click and drag it in here, and that's will be my heart texture. All right, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, I'm going to create new material, and I'm going to name this material heart particle. Heart particle. And I'll drag my texture up to the texture there. So this heart particle is of my heart texture. and I'm going to change the shader to a particle shader. So the particle shader is all the shaders that work with particles. And I'm going to choose, it doesn't really matter, additive, sure. And then with my particle system, I'm just going to click and drag my new material. I'm going to drop it on there. There we go. And we get hearts. It's that simple. And if I want to take this a step further, you might be thinking of that picture we posted. I could do, let's do a gradient. There we go. And we can have lovely hearts being emitted like that. And so we can create some cool heart effects and whatnot. And you'll see these are slightly transparent. You can see that they're kind of, you can see where the edges where they meet, and that's because our shader is additive. If I were to go particles vertex lit blended, then I would need some light for that to work. I could do particles alpha blended, just like that, and then they look right. So we have a lot of sort of options there. Okay. Now, that all being said, let's look at some particle effects. So now you've seen all of the particles. Let's see some stuff that we can actually do with this. All right, you've waited long enough. So let us go ahead and we'll just delete that. There are a couple of things we're going to do. So first, I'm going to show you some free particle effects that are available on the asset store. All right. We could blend the heart into spheres as they're emitted. One of the questions here, we could use the animation sheet to do that quite easily, actually. But let's go to Window and Asset Store, and I'm going to show you some of Unity's free particle effects. Now, Unity has some other particle effects available in the assets to just import, but they're the old system, not the new Shuriken system. And I'll show you how to access those too. But I'm going to type particles in the search window, and I will get, I'm looking for, where am I looking for? I'm looking for something called simple particles. We used to be just sitting right here. Where did that go? Not fire particles. Let's do particle system. I forget what I typed in earlier and it just popped right up. You can see there are a lot of particle systems available for you to use on the asset store. None of these are the one I want. Of course I can't find what I want. There it is. Simple particle pack. Whoops, I was way off. Simple particle packed. Okay, so I'll click that. Now I've already downloaded it, so I have this import option. You might see download and import. I've already downloaded it, so I'm just going to click import here. And what that's going to give me is a bunch of sample particle effects. So I will expand this, I'll click scenes and load this scene. And then I will hit play. And I'm going to get a bunch of these menu options. All right. Now there is a particle assets and standard assets. Those are different. And I'll show you those here in a second. But so here I have some options. I've got explosions, flares, and flames. Let me expand explosions, and I can see burst, some destruction, explosions with fire. These are some different things we can do. We got fireballs. So you can all download these. It's free on the SSO. I just showed you how to get to it, and you can look at how they built all of these. All of these are Shuriken systems, and only Shuriken systems, right? So it's not like they had special anything else to make these. They're all very simple, easy to do. So we can create different flares, multicolor, colored bursts, right? Something like that. This is all particle system stuff. Have autumn colors and that sort of thing. All right. And then flames, we can have, say, torch, right? Someone was asking about fire. There's a great torch system right there. Simple, we can have small flames, different colors and stuff like that. So those are all made with the Shuriken particle system. I downloaded it. It was called the Simple Particle Pack on the Unity store. Let me show you something else too. So as someone mentioned before, that there are these particle systems available in the standard assets. So if I go to Assets, Import Package, Particles, I'm going to get to these particle systems. I do want to tell you that these are made with the old system. These are not made with the shuriken system, so these will be a little bit different. Okay, so if we're going to standard assets, particles, dust, I can create a dust storm. Let me turn wireframe off. So you can see here it doesn't have the same component system that the shuriken one does. So these look a little bit different, which is why we are seeing that. I don't know where the wireframe button is on this one. So let me just hit the play button. And we can see that we get a dust storm, right? We have some fire. Let's delete that. Goodbye. We have fire and we have flame, right? So these are pre-made. These are the old system, right? And you can see that this is a double. It's got fire and it's got smoke as well. And it looks pretty good, but it's just the old system. So those are available for you as well. Now, one more thing I want to do before we're going to wrap up here today is I want to show you some other really cool effects. These I have in a different project. So real quick here, I'm going to open a new project. There we go. And so I want to show you these. I have no idea where you can find these, but I wanted to show them to you anyway. So I apologize. I can't tell you where to download these because someone at Unity says like, hey, check these out. And these were from a Unite session on the new shuriken particle system. So yeah, I can't tell you where you can find these. I do apologize. But I wanted to show them to you anyway because it's something new. It'll show you some of the cool things that you can do. All right, so we have basic like a flame jet. All right, we have explosions, and obviously looping was left turned on this one, so we get this looping. But explosions, we have fireballs. Right, we have like flame orbs. We have ground magic effects. Now all of these are done using the shuriken system. Nothing special, no fancy proprietary anything, nothing that you don't have access to, right? So all these neat effects were done with very basic stuff, right? Here we have this kind of this line being made with particles, right? We can do that. This one's really cool. I like this one a lot. This is all done using the particle system, right? This is, again, shuriken particle system. Really neat stuff. I like that one a lot too, especially because we just did the other one with hearts. So this is all shuriken particle system. Basically what we have is a sub-emitter that's turning this heart into two pieces of a heart and stuff like that. We have a whirlwind, and I think, oh, and we got this one. This one's really neat too. This reminds me a lot of MMO magic effects, and again, all done with shuriken. Yeah, so I emailed the guy who gave it to me and said, hey, where can I get this to share with all of you? And he hasn't emailed me back. So I don't know where he got them, but he sent them to me. So I still wanted to show them to you, and just so you can see them and stuff like that. But yeah, all of these are done with the shuriken particle system. So when I'm showing you the little white circles in these different modules, and you're like, okay, whatever, right? These are just little effects and stuff like that. I want you to understand that we built some really, really cool stuff with these. Yeah, well, there was a couple of magical effects, but that one I like a lot, and that one's really cool. But yeah, that's all particle system, and that's all stuff we can do there. So anyway, that's going to kind of wrap up my talk about the shuriken particle system. A lot of assets with particles and stuff are available in the asset store. A lot of them are available free. Some of them are built in. There's a lot of cool stuff we can do there. So anyway, so we talked about the particle system component and game object. We talked about the difference between a particle system and a particle effect. We talked about the many different modules. We talked about adding your own textures, and we looked at some of the ones from the asset store and stuff like that. Someone is saying in chat that the effects I'm showing you is the shuriken particle effect pack, which is available on the asset store. So there you go. That must be where we got them from. So fantastic. Please stop posting. You've posted it 7 times now. We get it. It's what it is. Okay, so pretty much going to wrap up there. Again, thank you all for watching. I am going to post this one more time. If you have any questions, comments, things like that, feel free to message us on Twitter, at Unity3D, at Mike Guy, which is me, at Will Goldstone, and at the Ant Ranch. Real quick, we're getting a couple questions here. How well do particles work on mobile? They work okay. right? I mean, mobile is mobile. So mobile is inherently slower. It just is. It is what it is, right? They still work, but you really want to be careful about what you're doing with them and stuff like that. One of the questions is, where can we send a request for more training? To me, just on Twitter, just message me, shoot me an email, mike@unity3d.com. Let me know what you guys want to see. I'm more than happy to. I'm actually looking for ideas, so send me whatever you want to do. We have some ideas, but not as much scheduled. Let's see here. Only this. I want to. Oh yeah, we have more scheduled or sessions scheduled. They're just not or planned. They're just not scheduled on the site yet. They will be there. I just I'm lazy and I haven't done it yet. But we will be do that. Yeah, light probe. Oh yeah, light probes is a good one. Yeah, we're talking about like maybe light probes, serialization, nav meshes, AI, that sort of thing. But those take me a little bit longer to prepare, so we're kicking around a few different ones. Next week is a scripting primer and QA. So if you've never done any scripting, please come watch that one. Ask any questions you might have, that sort of stuff. Anyway, so feel free to message me on Twitter, email, whatever. We're on Facebook, all that sort of stuff, and give us your questions, your comments, suggestions. Love suggestions. And that sort of thing. Okay, I think that's going to pretty much wrap it up today. I went a little bit longer than what I had hoped to do, so we'll go ahead and end up now. And thank you everyone for watching. I certainly appreciate everyone's attendance. It's always fun when there's more people. So no problem, and you all have a fantastic week.